Hi everyone and welcome to episode 101 of the Rewarding Property Decisions podcast. So I talk quite regularly on the podcast about the journey up the property ladder. So potentially for first home buyers getting into the market or first time investors getting into the market, upgrading, so going from a smaller property into a larger family home potentially, or even buying your forever home, what people term and getting into their dream home. So I guess that's the work to the end. So people are looking to achieve their objectives. But what happens once you actually get to that point where you've achieved your objectives, you've built yourself up, you're at the top of the property ladder, and then you want to take that step back down, which many people refer to as downsizing. So the reverse, is it actually the reverse where you're making different decisions, or is it still the same but just in a different format? Now downsizing can be and should be a very exciting time for people. It's almost just as so as perhaps buying your first home. But for many people who haven't perhaps transacted real estate for decades because they've been in the family home and had their attention focused on many other things, it can be a very daunting and overwhelming task. And the decision can be made for many reasons. And some of those, unfortunately, are not by your own choice. So today I wanted to just have a look at some of the considerations that need to be made. And there are a number, and there needs to be a lot of planning put into place, potentially even more so with a downsize than there is with other acquisitions. So I just wanted to go through the reasons and how and why and some of the things that people can do to make sure that process is as simple as it possibly can be. So we go through the why, what, when, how, that type of thing. And the first one we'll start with is why do people downsize? And it might seem like a pretty obvious thing for most people, but there are differing reasons as to why people do it. The first one obviously is the size of the home, and that's probably the most common. People look at it and say, well, I don't need this family home anymore, this oversized property. Perhaps it's got far too many bedrooms. Most of the time when people downsize, there's only going to be one or two people living in the new home. So the number of bedrooms is probably going to be less. Perhaps the number of living zones is also less. We don't necessarily need 2 or 3 areas. We're happy to just have the one that we're all going to reside in. But probably the most common around size is the maintenance side of things. So people just don't want to have to look after a yard anymore. They don't want to have to do the cleaning of a large home that's perhaps not being utilised. And a common one that I've had in recent times with a number of clients is swimming pools, and they just get sick of looking after them, feel like they're a money pit. We're not using it. The kids aren't here. Why do we want to have this? And I don't want to have to look after it anymore. So that's quite a common one as well. The next one is the type of property as to why people might want to change. And again, that's the large family home, but it's going from that to what. And there's a variety of properties that people will look at, and we'll go through those in a bit more detail later on. But units and apartments are always quite often popular because they are very low maintenance, and they can be used quite well as a town base. So for perhaps someone who's got a holiday home and that might become the principal place of residence, a unit or an apartment can be a really good option as a town base. And another a reason in terms of type is perhaps you've had a 2-story or even in some circumstances 3-story family home, and the stairs can become a bit of an issue when getting to downsizing in latter years of life. So a single level home is quite often quite popular as well. The next one in terms of why is location. So the suburban location that was so appropriate while raising a family potentially is not needed anymore, and perhaps we want a little bit more excitement. We don't need to be in that suburban area, and if the family's moved away, there can be opportunities to try something different. So the proximity to the school's no longer needed. Public transport, it might be that the kids needed that, but you don't anymore. It could be reversed. We didn't need public transport because everything we did was in the immediate vicinity of where we lived. Now we do, because we want to be able to get to entertainment, to restaurants. We want to go to the arts precinct in the city, or we want to be able to go to the MCG or to Marvel to watch some football. So having access or proximity to public transport can be a location characteristic, but also priorities just change. So once we get the priorities sorted as to what the objectives are with the downsize, location and what's important can be a different option. Another one, and this is another common one, and it's sometimes it can be a bit of a misconception, which we'll get to as well, but to release some equity. So you've built up, potentially paid down a home and paid it off. So there's a lot of equity there that might need to be released for other purposes. It might be that you're looking to partially use that equity to fund a retirement. You don't need that amount of wealth tied up in a single asset anymore, or you may be looking to assist children to get into the property market as a point of assistance as well. So there's a number of different reasons. Another reason why, and this might seem silly, but sometimes for people, the reason to downsize, it might be to encourage children or dependents to move out of the home, in that they've been here long enough. We need you to get out and do your thing so that we can now start to enjoy the latter stages of our working life and moving into retirement as well. So that can be an option as well. So when does this downsizing work, and when is it something that people are looking to do? Well, it's quite often around retirement age for many people. Sometimes it's different. It might be earlier, but it's quite often it's around retirement age. And you just, the lifestyle changes. What you require, again, access to and from work perhaps is no longer needed, or if you work from home, we don't need that space anymore. We need space for other things that we want to use. So looking to make a move, and it might be that you're not wanting to be in that location now that you've retired. I know plenty of clients and family as well that have moved from regional areas to beachside or tree change type locations. So it might just be that is when you make that move. And you just don't need to be in that location anymore. And another time when people do it is when children have moved out. It might be that you're still in your working stages of life, but children are no longer there. They've moved out and doing their own thing, which might still have 10 years left. Again, the cosmopolitan lifestyle or moving in a different direction, potentially if people have got a bit more flexibility around working, that sort of thing, they might look to look at alternatives. Don't want to spend their years looking after properties that are no longer required. So the downsize enables them to move somewhere else, continue to work, go out, have a good time, but not have to worry about looking after a house that's no longer necessary. But unfortunately, sometimes when people need to do it is when circumstances change and it becomes more of a requirement than a choice. And it might be that health dictates that. It might be a knee injury, a hip injury, something along those lines, which might make stairs or the current family home, no longer viable, and therefore the choice is taken away from you, and it's more a case of I have to do this, and no one likes that. No one wants to have a decision forced upon them. So it's always something to be mindful of. Health is always good until it's not. So making sure that you're up with that and able to make the decision when you want to, rather than when it's forced upon you. So where do people downsize to? And again, this is very much a personal choice. There's no one size fits all to any of this, but particularly to where. And there can be different reasons for why people choose to downsize to particular areas. But one of them is generally around services, and that can be particularly the case for perhaps those that have been living in regional areas, and perhaps medical facilities in some regional locations may not be up to the standard or offer the services that are needed, and therefore you might need to move to a larger regional city, or you might need to move to the CBD or the city itself so that you've got access to those types of services. Public transport, like we said before, it might just be that now you do or don't need it. But access to shops and restaurants is always a big thing I find with downsizers. They want to be able to still get access to all of the services that make their day-to-day life easy. And quite often being near a gym is a really important thing as you get older too, to be able to go and keep yourself fit and keep yourself healthy. The sea change or tree change is quite often a popular where as well. So the change of lifestyle, if you've already got and fortunate enough to have a holiday home of some description, sometimes that can become the new principal place of residence, and therefore selling the family home and perhaps having a smaller place in town might be the choice. Or perhaps sometimes it's just a total change. I had some clients a number of years ago who were looking, their children had left Melbourne, and they decided that they would do a trip around Australia in their caravan, and they had the northern coasts of New South Wales in mind as to where they would like to retire, but they didn't have a town picked. So they were going to just stop at different caravan parks along the way, look at the towns, look at how they felt, and they ended up choosing a place up on the coast, and that's where they decided to buy a property and retire to. I thought it was a really good idea, particularly when they didn't have the ties to Melbourne anymore. And from speaking to them in recent times, they're having a fantastic time and really loving the lifestyle change. So yeah, it can be the tree change, sea change is always a big one as well. But for others, it might be that you've been in a suburban location or in a regional location, and the cosmopolitan lifestyle is what appeals. So moving into some of the inner city areas, using Melbourne as the example, obviously, Fitzroy, Collingwood, Richmond, Carlton North, those sorts of locations, Clifton Hill, Albert Park, Middle Park, South Yarra, Paran, to have that cosmopolitan lifestyle, be able to walk everywhere you want to go to, and be able to get into the arts precinct or to the MCG and things easily, is quite appealing for perhaps those that haven't been able to have that or haven't had it for a number of years and are really looking forward to that. So that's always a big one as well. The next one is what. So what types of properties make good downsize options? And again, this is very much a personal choice, but there's usually some pretty key elements that we see as a pretty common thread when it comes to downsizing. And those are things like a single level home, as I mentioned before, whether it's an apartment or unit, but single level. Low maintenance is always a big one, but good storage facilities. I mean, when you're coming from a large family home, having good storage space is really important. Good natural light, we always find. A large living area, because quite often people are wanting to entertain. They may not have as much space, so having a good open plan living is quite often important. And parking, we always find, is a big thing too, particularly for those with apartments and things. They want to be able to just drive in and have the security of going straight into their property. So let's look at the different types of property that people consider. And when it's a house, they're quite often, it's something that wanting to get a little bit smaller, single level, but still have the size and the space that perhaps they've had in the past. A lot of people like the idea of downsizing, but don't necessarily want to have too much. They know they've got a lot of furniture and they don't want to have too much of a smaller space. It's more about the land block, the block size. So that can be a big part with houses, but also going to a single level when you've perhaps been in a double story family home is important as well. Looking at units, so more of that villa type, and they can be very popular. There's a great variety in ages of villa units, and they vary greatly in size as well. The 1950s through to modern times is typically what you'll find with villa units. The older style ones, so built in the 50s, 60s and 70s, more often than not are 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, single garage, small courtyard, which can work really well, but probably more suited to someone that's using it as a town base as opposed to a permanent residence. Although they do work quite well for that as well if you don't need that extra space. The more modern versions, which are typically 3 or 4 bedrooms with 2 or 3 bathrooms, then more suited to being the principal place of residence if that's what you're after. And they're quite popular in that because they are single level, quite often double garage. They've still got quite a good outdoor space in most instances, so they work well and they have that bit more space to them. So from a downsize perspective, it doesn't feel like it's too much of a smaller house for those that need that. Apartment, as I said before, they're very popular, particularly the sort of more medium density types, or even the more boutique type blocks that have been specifically built for downsizers. So might only be 10 or 12 in the block, but have got a lift, got a basement car space, work really well. They're very low maintenance, and because they're built particularly targeting downsizers, they're quite often built for purpose. So they're very popular in that regard. Good size, are very mindful of accessibility, very mindful of storage. Developers do quite often do a really good job of those. So the apartments are very popular in that regard. So are the high-rises in a lot of circumstances, again, for those that want to be able to be right in the middle of the action. And if you've got a principal place of residence outside the city, to be able to drive into a Dockland, South Bank, South Yarra, and drive down into your basement, catch your lift up, and then go out and get something to eat within half an hour of arriving, is very popular and highly sought after. Then the final one is townhouses, and they're probably not as popular around a downsize, primarily because there's obviously 2 stories and the stairs can become an issue. And sometimes developers are far more focused on what's going to be profitable for them rather than what the market actually wants. So I think we're starting to see it a little bit more now, where they're making sure that there's the master bedroom's on the ground floor with an ensuite and the living space, and there might be a couple of bedrooms upstairs, so that if the extra rooms are needed, they're there. But if a resident can only live on the ground floor, well, there's no need to go upstairs. So they can work in that regard, but the 2-story nature means that they're probably not quite as popular as other forms of housing. And then the final one, in terms of factors that play into downsizing, is how you do this. And this is probably where it gets a little bit daunting for people, because there does need to be quite a bit of planning involved with this to make sure that you do it right and clearly lay out the objectives of what you're looking to achieve, because everyone does have different objectives out of this. And And then you need to make sure you've got the appropriate levels of support around you in order to carry out that planning. So I think a financial planner is really important to make sure that you know how you're doing it, and a really good one who understands your circumstances really clearly. And a mortgage broker, not necessarily because you will definitely be able to get finance, and we'll get to that in a second, but it's just to have someone to bounce those sorts of ideas off. And then obviously your accountant, solicitor, those sorts of things, and building inspector, depending upon type of property. And obviously your real estate professionals, whether it's just using straight a real estate agent or whether a property advisor, buyer's advocate as well. There's different options around, but it depends on your circumstances and what you're looking for. But for many people who are expecting to downsize to free up equity, they can quite often get a bit of a rude shock. And we see this quite often in that for many instances, the downsize is only physical. It's not from a value proposition perspective, in that because you might be coming from a suburban location on a large family home and you're moving into the city, it might be that your family home hasn't had a renovation for 15, 20 years because you've had other things to spend your money on and focus on. And so the house is a little dated. You're then coming into a higher land value location, and obviously buying in, you're probably wanting to buy something that's ready to move in, that's pretty new, recently renovated, and ready to go. So you're buying in a high land value area, high quality property, even though it's smaller. And so quite often there's not a great deal of difference in the value of your previous home to what you're buying into. So that's where that planning and research really is important, to understand that, am I actually going to be freeing up equity with what I'm intending to do? Or do I have enough funds with my other investments, with super, those sorts of things, that's going to fund that? And therefore the downsize only needs to be physical. It doesn't need to be from an equity perspective. But you do really need to do a lot of planning around this, because it is a big consideration. And then as a downsizer, you need to look at the stage of life and plan around that too, because when we're looking at should I buy first or should I sell first, when you're at an earlier stage of life, you may have a bit more choice because you're still going to be generating an income and therefore be able to get a loan. Whereas we have a lot of clients that, because you're at the latter stages of life or perhaps at retirement age, the bank's going to say, well, we're not giving you any money to borrow, and we're not going to give you bridging finance either. And so therefore, the decision's taken out of your hands. You have to sell first in order to be able to fund the purchase. So then the planning needs to be made around that, because what you don't want to do is get caught up in the fact that, oh, we've sold, now we have to buy something. We've got to find something now. And then you start compromising and buying the wrong property. So laying the plan out really clearly, is important, so that you get your price, try and get as long a settlement as you possibly can. And then when you come to buying, you make sure you buy the right property. But you have a plan that if we don't secure something during that settlement period on our sale, we know what we're going to do. It's not ideal. We don't necessarily want to rent. We may not want to have to go and stay with family. We may not want to have to go and stay in a holiday home. But that may be required in order to make sure that we don't compromise and just buy for the sake of buying on the downsize side, because you want to, as I said earlier, you want to make sure that this is a really enjoyable and a fun thing to be going through. So I think that's really important, to make sure that you've got that. You plan for the worst and hope for the best. And if you go through that process, you're far more likely to have success and do it the right way, and enjoy that transition. So today's case study, we've helped many clients, particularly in probably the last 5 to 10 years, around transitioning from the family home into a downsized home. And we've got plenty of examples of how they've worked really, really well. Everyone is very different. There's not a one-size-fits-all strategy, as I said, for this. So sometimes people are in a position where they can buy first rather than sell first. Other times you don't have a choice. That's the way you've got to go. But it's important to just get a clear understanding of what those circumstances are and lay that plan out. So I had a really good one a few years ago. Some clients came to us. They were looking to downsize as their children had left home, but their children had remained in Melbourne, and they had grandchildren and things, so they wanted to stay in Melbourne to be around their family as much as possible. But because their family was going to be living in Melbourne, they didn't feel like they needed a large home. They didn't feel like they'd be having too many guests coming to stay, perhaps grandkids every now and then, but they didn't need a lot of space. They were happy with a 2 to 3 bedroom property was going to be adequate for what they were looking for. And it was also going to be their principal place of residence. They didn't have a holiday home, but they didn't want one either. So that was going to be where they were. And from speaking with their financial advisor, they understood that finance wasn't going to be an option. We had to sell their property first in order to finance the purchase of the second one. So we went through a lot of options around selling. And for those of you that listen to the podcast on a regular basis, you'll know that I'm not always the greatest fan of selling off market, because I feel like it minimises your market too much. You don't get full exposure. However, in this circumstance, the agent that we were intending to use had just sold a property very similar to ours, probably slightly superior. And there was an underbidder off the back of that one who was very keen and very motivated. So we got that underbidder through, and after some negotiations over an extended period, we got them up to what we all felt was a really, really strong price, and we happened to do it just before the market started to turn down. But what that also enabled us to do as part of that negotiation was to get a long settlement, which was 6 months in length, which really gave us plenty of time to start to look on the buying side of things. And luckily we did, because it took us all of the 6 months to find the right property to buy, but we were able to get it, secure it, and get the settlements to tie in relatively easily. So it was a pretty seamless transition for this client to get into their new property and really start enjoying it. And the other benefit that we had out of it was that it freed up a considerable amount of equity because of the type of property that we purchased, which was, again, part of the plan that the financial planner had put into place in this instance. So it all worked out really, really well. But there was a lot of planning that went in at the start of this to make sure that we knew exactly where. And if we hadn't been able to find the property, even though we'd gotten that 6 month settlement, we still had a plan of where the clients would go to in terms of alternate accommodation if we weren't able to secure a property in that layover period. So it worked out really well. But yeah, it's just all about planning when it comes to this and making sure that you've got a really clear understanding. So that's about it. Thanks very much for joining me for episode 101 of the Rewarding Property Decisions podcast. As always, please feel free to share the podcast far and wide with friends, family, and on your social media channels. Otherwise, if you'd like further information, visit our website, wakeland.com.au. Otherwise, we wish you all the best with your property decisions.